while the hits were blazing up the charts and the tours were packing out theaters, Berry Gordy knew that talent alone wouldn't be enough to conquer the mainstream. That's where Maxine Powell came in. She wasn't a singer, songwriter, or a producer. She was a teacher of grace. Under her guidance, Motown's rising stars learned how to carry themselves with polish, pride, and professionalism. This wasn't just about manners. It was about making sure black artists were respected and revered across America and the world. We're breaking down the incredible story of how the Motown Finishing School helped artists like Diana Ross, Marvin Gaye, and the Temptations evolved from local talents into global icons. Hey, yo, what's going on, guys? This is Kanoa Speaks. We diving into the archives to bring you the moments from history that shaped the R&B and soul genres. Let's set the scene. When Berry Gordy founded Motown Records in 1959, he wasn't just creating a hit-making machine, he was crafting a brand, a legacy, and a cultural force that could reshape how the world saw black talent. Gordy believed in more than just great songwriting or smooth harmonies. He believed that presentation, polish, and professionalism were just as essential as the music itself. This belief didn't come from nowhere. Gordy had worked at the Ford Motor Company and admired how the assembly line built products that were consistent, refined, and ready for the world. He wanted to do the same thing with Motown, refining raw musical talent into stars who could stand toe-to-toe with anyone in the entertainment industry. And that meant shaping not just sound, but style. In the early days, many Motown artists were teenagers from Detroit neighborhoods, bursting with talent but unfamiliar with the social expectations of a national stage. Gordy saw their potential, but he also saw the barriers they'd face in a segregated America. If Motown artists were going to cross over into white households, perform on national television, and command international stages, they needed more than stage presence. They needed elegance, charm, and sophistication. This is where Gordy made one of his most forward-thinking moves. He brought in Maxine Powell, a poised, elegant, and well-mannered woman who had trained actors, models, and speakers in etiquette, deportment, and public speaking. Her role at Motown wasn't to teach music, it was to teach poise. Powell was entrusted with refining the stars of Motown, helping them navigate a world that wasn't built to welcome them, but could be won over by their grace, talent, and professionalism. Gordy's vision wasn't about assimilation, it was about excellence. He didn't want Motown artists to tone themselves down. He wanted them to rise so high in style and presence that the industry couldn't ignore them. With Maxine Powell by his side, he was about to launch a quiet revolution, one rooted in self-respect, confidence, and the power of commanding a room without saying a word. Long before she became the force of refinement behind Motown's biggest stars, Maxine Powell had already built a reputation in Detroit as a woman of sophistication, discipline, and presence. Born in 1915, Powell trained in both theater and personal development, eventually establishing her own finishing and modeling school where she taught young black men and women the social graces often denied to them in segregated America. Her philosophy was radical in its simplicity. Elegance and confidence could be taught, and with them, doors could be opened. She understood that in a world full of prejudice and closed minds, presentation could be a weapon, a way to flip perceptions and demand respect. She wasn't training performers to be fake or to hide their identity. She was teaching them how to be seen in their fullest light. Berry Gordy first brought Powell to Motown in the early 1960s. He admired her ability to bring out the best in people, not just physically, but emotionally and intellectually. Once at Motown, Powell's role was made clear: transform the raw local talent coming into Hitsville into refined world-class entertainers. Her sessions weren't optional, they were required, and they weren't easy. Powell taught everything from posture, diction, and how to gracefully enter a room. How to sit, how to stand, and even hold silverware at a dinner with executives. She corrected how artists spoke in interviews and how they carried themselves in public. She even prepared them for press conferences and taught them how to handle rude or radically loaded questions with dignity. Maxine Powell operated from a place of deep respect for the artists in her care. She didn't believe in breaking people down. She believed in building them up. Her approach wasn't about fitting in with white America's expectations. It was about elevating black artists to a level where they were undeniable, where the world would have no choice but to see them as the stars they already were. Under Powell's direction, Motown artists began to evolve before the fans' very eyes. They were no longer just performers from Detroit. They were icons in the making, and the world was starting to take notice. Inside the walls of Hitsville, USA, the Motown Charm School operated like a quiet but powerful institution of transformation. While the record studios were filled with melodies and bass lines, another kind of rhythm was taking shape, one rooted in posture, grace, and confidence. This was Maxine Powell's domain. To many young artists walking into Powell's sessions, the experience was very, very humbling. Some came in with street smarts and swagger, but little exposure to the refined world of television interviews, industry banquets, and foreign press. Powell greeted each one with firm but maternal energy. Her message was clear: you are already special. I'm just here to make sure the world sees it too. Lessons covered every aspect of public presentation. Artists were taught how to walk with purpose, how to hold eye contact, and how to sit elegantly on a talk show couch. They practiced their speaking voices, learned how to answer difficult questions gracefully, and received wardrobe advice to match their growing status. Powell once said, "I teach class, not classes." And her approach reflected that. It was tailored, thoughtful, and deeply intentional. Diana Ross, one of Powell's most dedicated students, would later credit how much of her poise and confidence to those early days in Charm School. Powell helped her understand how to control a room, how to lead with confidence, and how to present herself as a woman of class and power. That refinement became part of Diana's signature style, seen in everything from her red carpet presence to her concert performances. The Temptations, known for their slick choreography and cool demeanor, also benefited from Powell's guidance. While their stage moves were crafted by choreographers like Charlie Atkins and Paul Williams, Powell would help them polish their offstage persona. Whether speaking to reporters or greeting fans, they projected calm, class, and control. Even Marvin Gaye, who was notoriously shy in his early years, found growth under Powell's mentorship. She pushed him to stand taller, speak with assurance, and own the space he was in, not just as a singer, but as a man worthy of being seen. It wasn't about perfection. It was about intention. Powell didn't aim to erase the individuality of Motown stars. She aimed to enhance it. She made sure they weren't just heard, but respected, and that respect extended far beyond the stage. By the mid-1960s, the results of her work were clear. Motown artists were being booked on mainstream TV shows, receiving glowing press coverage, and moving seamlessly through a world that had once shut them out. And behind every graceful gesture, behind every poised reply, was the invisible touch of Maxine Powell. By the mid-1960s, the effect of Maxine Powell's work was impossible to ignore. The artists of Motown were no longer just local sensations or rising stars. They were full-fledged cultural icons. And while their talent and music paved the way, their presentation helped them break through barriers that once seemed unmovable. Motown's artists began appearing on nationally televised programs that rarely, if ever, featured black performers. Shows like The Ed Sullivan Show and American Bandstand introduced millions of viewers to Motown acts who carried themselves with striking elegance and professionalism. They commanded the room. Their posture, their poise, their ability to handle interviews with charm and grace made them stand out in a country still steeped in segregation and racial tension. And mainstream America took notice. The suits were sharp, the gowns were flawless, and the artists moved with an ease that radiated class. These were not entertainers you could easily dismiss or stereotype. They were polished, articulate, and proud of who they were. And Powell's influence was stitched into every detail of their presentation. And that impact extended beyond the performance. As Motown artists traveled across the country on tours like the Motown Review, their charm school training became kind of like an anchor. When faced with racism, segregation, or hostile media, they didn't lose their cool. They leaned into their discipline and self-respect. It was a quiet form of protest, dignity in the face of disrespect, and it often left critics speechless. Powell's work also helped them open commercial doors. Brands, venues, and media outlets that had once turned their backs on black performers began to reconsider. When people saw artists like Diana Ross, Smokey Robinson, or the Four Tops, they saw more than just entertainers. They saw ambassadors of a new generation, reshaping what black excellence looked like in the public eye. What Maxine Powell had done was help shift the narrative. She didn't create the talent, but she elevated it. She ensured that when the spotlight hit a Motown artist, they were ready not just to perform, but to own the moment they were in. And in doing so, she helped Motown move from a Detroit record label to an American institution. Long after the final records were pressed and the golden era of Motown faded into music history, the legacy of Maxine Powell continued to echo through the artists she helped shape. Her impact wasn't tied to a single hit or an album. It lived on the way the Motown artists moved, spoke, and carried themselves on and off the stage. Her role was never flashy, and she rarely sought the spotlight, but those who studied under her never forgot her lessons. Diana Ross once described Powell as one of the most influential people in her life, crediting her with teaching her how to navigate the world with dignity and power. Smokey Robinson called her the finishing touch of everything we did, a quiet architect behind the scenes who helped elevate Motown to global prestige. Even decades later, the values Powell instilled, self-respect, discipline, and grace, remain embedded in Motown's DNA. When fans think of those unforgettable televised moments, Diana Ross gliding across the stage, the Temptations standing sharp in perfect formation, Marvin Gaye cool and composed in an interview, it's Powell's influence they're seeing, even if they don't realize it. But perhaps her greatest legacy was the sense of possibility she gave her students. At a time when young black artists were rarely taught that they belong in high society and deserved international recognition, Powell treated them like royalty in training. She saw their greatness before the world did, and she demanded they carried themselves accordingly. Maxine Powell passed away in 2013 at the age of 98, but her teachings remain timeless. In a music industry that often focuses only on image and numbers, Powell's approach was rooted in substance. She taught them how to own their worth. Today, as Motown continues to be celebrated as one of the most important cultural institutions in American history, Powell's contribution stands tall. She didn't write the songs or produce the records, but she helped shape the stars that made Motown legendary. As Motown evolved in the 1970s, so did the music industry and the label itself. The company began to shift away from its Detroit roots, moving to its headquarters in Los Angeles in 1972 in pursuit of broader opportunities in film, television, and multimedia. With this transition came the slow winding down of many of the old Hitsville traditions, including one of its most unique and impactful programs, the Motown Charm School. By the time Motown officially made its westward move, the Charm School's role had already begun to fade. Many of the artists Maxine Powell had mentored were now international superstars, seasoned veterans of the stage, screen, and press. Diana Ross had become a solo powerhouse and movie star. Smokey Robinson had stepped into executive roles. The Temptations and the Jackson 5 were household names. The students had grew up, and the institution that shaped them began to fade quietly into the background. Maxine Powell stayed behind in Detroit, where she continued to work with young people through etiquette workshops and public speaking programs. Though her time with Motown had ended, her mission continued. She never stopped believing in the power of presence, polish, and pride. The Charm School was never formally dismantled with a press release or farewell party. It simply faded as the label's focus changed. But those who walked through those doors never forgot the lessons learned under Powell's guidance. It became part of the lore of Hitsville, one of the many unique practices that made Motown more than a record label. It was a place where artists were molded, not just marketed. In the years that followed, as Motown was studied, celebrated, and archived, the Charm School regained attention as one of the most revolutionary aspects of Berry Gordy's vision. Today, it's viewed as a groundbreaking cultural institution, especially in how it trained young black artists to step into spaces they weren't always welcomed and leave those spaces unforgettable. Maxine Powell once said, "I brought out the beauty, power, and grace that was already within them." The closing of the Motown Charm School didn't mark the end of that spirit. It simply meant her students were now carrying it forward on their own. And in every poised gesture, every commanding presence, every graceful response, her teachings live on. But check this out. In 1971, as Stevie Wonder turned 21, he renegotiated his contract with Motown to gain full artistic control and made Motown evolve with him. Click here to watch now, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.